What is up, ladies and gentlemen? This is Kensei Sensei, and in today's lesson, we're going to be talking about how to connect actions in Japanese. In particular, we're going to be looking at two new grammar points. One is nagara, and the second is tari or tarisuru. Let's get right in. So with the first grammar point, nagara, this conjugation is used when we're connecting two verbs where both actions are happening simultaneously, or in other words, both actions are happening at the same time. The main action comes after nagara, and the background action comes before nagara. In order to get the nagara form, we need to go through conjugation. Now, if you can recall, when we are conjugating verbs in Japanese, we first conjugate it to its mas stem. If you don't know how to get the mas stem, make sure to check out my previous video on mas. Once you get the mas form, instead of adding mas, we can add nagara. And then after nagara, we can add the main action or the main verb. Let's look at an example. アルバイトをしながら学校に行きます. In this case, the main action is to go to school or 学校に行きます. And then the background action, which is the action that is happening at the same time as the main action, アルバイトをする, which means to work a part-time job. So in this case, we are saying, I go to school while working a part-time job. So as you can see, the background action is happening at the same time or simultaneously as the main action. Let's look at another example. 音楽を聴きながら掃除しました. Again, first identify the main action, which is 掃除しました, which is to clean up. And then the action that is happening at the same time is 音楽を聴く, which is to listen to music. So this sentence basically means I cleaned while listening to music. Now that you know how to use nagara in a sentence, let's go over some rules with the nagara form. Nagara can only be used when it is the same person doing two actions at the same time. So we can't use nagara when we're talking about two people that are doing two different actions at the same time. So again, nagara can only be used when the same person does two things at the same time. Now the second rule is that when we use nagara, it does not have to refer to actions that happen currently or that is happening at the current moment. Instead, it can refer to a habitual or a long-term action. So if we look at the first example that I brought up, アルバイトをしながら学校に行きます. In this case, we are talking about a habitual action. We are going to school while doing a part-time job. It's not like I am doing the part-time job and I'm going to school at the same time at the current moment. We're talking about a habitual action. Whereas the second example, 音楽を聴きながら掃除します. In this case, both the main action and the background action are happening at the exact same time, at the current moment. Now some of you may be wondering, what is the difference between the te form and the nagara form? If you can recall, we use the te form to connect two actions. And we do the same thing with nagara, except, again, remember, nagara is used when two actions are happening at the same time, simultaneously. However, with the te form, two actions happen sequentially. In other words, one action happens first, and then another action happens with the te form. So let's examine this example sentence. I eat while sitting down. In this English sentence, I want you to first think, are we doing these two actions simultaneously together? Or does one action happen first and then an action happens afterwards? Are we doing the action while sitting down on a chair? Or are we sitting down on a chair first and then eating? It is obviously the latter. We are sitting down first and then we are eating. So in this case, instead of using the nagara form, we use the te form. 座って食べる. 座って食べる. So as you can see, the first action happens first, which is 座る, to sit down, and then we eat. 座って食べる. So again, in some cases, we use the te form instead of nagara because we're talking about a sequential action. Whereas we use nagara when we're talking about two actions that are happening at the same time simultaneously. So some verbs like turn off or to sit, to stand, to start, or to end indicate actions that are completed immediately. So in this case, we use the te form rather than nagara. Let's move on to the second grammar point, which is tari and tarisuru. We use tari and tarisuru when we are listing actions. I want you to recall the ya sentence particle. Remember, the ya sentence particle is what we use to list nouns. But the important part is that we are making an incomplete list. We're only bringing up examples that may apply to the list. So for example, if I say, リンゴやオレンジが好きです, we are implying that there are more than just apples and oranges that I like. I only brought up those two items as an example. So it's like saying, I like apples and oranges and etc. The etc. implies that it is an incomplete list. There may be more items in the list, but I just don't bring them up. So it is the exact same thing with tari and tarisuru. But with tarisuru, we are listing actions rather than nouns. So again, to summarize, this structure is used to list action among others. And it implies that the list is incomplete. And it implies that there are other actions that you may have done or are doing. So in order to get the tari form, we first conjugate the verb to its past form. And then we add ri. And if it's the end of the list, we end it with tarisuru. So let's look at an example. 今日は何するの?今日本を読んだり、映画見たりするよ. In this example, the first person is asking, what are you doing today? And then the second person answers by listing two actions. The second person basically says, today I will do things like read a book and watch a movie. As you can see, I translated this by saying things like, because it is an incomplete list. We're only giving examples of things that we will do today. I may do other things during the day, for example, cook dinner, but I just don't bring that up. I'm only giving examples of what I'm doing today. Let's look at another example. 昨日何したの?昨日本を読んだり、映画見たりしたよ. As you can see with this example, we're using the past tense. The first person is asking, what did you do yesterday? So it is in the past tense. So in this case, instead of ending with tarisuru, we end it with tarishita, because shita is the past tense of suru. There are different forms with tarisuru. You can say stuff like tarishitai, which is I want to do things like, or tarisuru yote, which is I plan to do things like, or tarisuru no ga suki, which is I like to do things like. So as you can see, you can change the suffix or whatever comes after tari in order to change the meaning of the sentence. So if I say 本を読んだり映画を見たりするのが好きです, that means I like to do things like read a book and watch a movie. But that's the end of today's lesson. I hope you learned something new. And if you have any Japanese questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. And if you're interested in participating in a Japanese to English language exchange Discord server, make sure to check out that link as well. But until next time, mata ne!